right, I'm gonna try and bite off a lot in this video. I'm not entirely certain if I'm gonna be able to connect all the dots, but we'll see how it goes. So in my book, I talk about basically the why of the self, the separate self or the ego or the default mode network, which I've come to use all these things interchangeably. Basically, it's just a construction or a constructed activity or process or processes that become stored in the brain over time, and at a certain point we become so attached to the various thoughts and memories and emotions that have passed before our particular stream of consciousness in this human form, to where that to where an entity is created, or the appearance of a continuous sense of separation, which is ultimately what meditation is designed to dissolve or unravel. But as I say in the book, this basically is a carryover from the animal kingdom, and that we're wired genetically and environmentally, we're wired for survival, to win out over a different species or just a different member of our own species. And so the default mode network serves a pretty valuable function for the human species, as it allows you to basically model a sense of your own experience over time into a pattern of behavior that allows you to make more money or attract more desirable romantic partners, or get more money. Did I already say that? Get a better job. Basically just figure out the best ways to do XYZ things, and it sort of reduces life to a means to an end, unfortunately. And ultimately, that's kind of where it ends up, because the mind or the self is a chasing machine that it's a computer, that figures out there's this thing out here and that's what I want, so these are the steps that I have to take to make that happen. And the information needed to do that in a variety of ways is gradually learned and stored in the brain over time. The ways to, get people to like you, to stay employed at a certain job, to navigate through this still fairly hierarchical and competitive world that we live in, although somewhat less so in the last few decades, but still essentially a survival-based existence. And that's useful and necessary up to a point. It creates all kinds of advances in human civilization, technology, innovation, and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. The difficulty arises when this machine which is really just a tool. The mind is a tool for manipulating existence as a human being. But what happens is that we start off basically as a blank slate as a child, and starting with our own name and just basic sort of just basic identifications for who and what we are is gradually piled on to the brain over time, and we latch on to one particular emotion or thought or identity, one at a time. I live here, I had this XYZ past with this experiences, and this shapes me as who I am. And over time, as that process goes on long enough, that continual identification takes place. There's no longer any gap in our thinking, or there's no longer any gap in our sense of self, because we've attached to it so continuously that this machine just goes on automatically. Just kind of reaches a certain momentum in our mind. I think we'll be able to have a better idea of where that threshold is in a neuroscientific standpoint as the research starts to come out more. But as far as I know, there's no way to really map when you're officially fucked, so to speak. When you've latched on to the narrative of separation and that there's actually somebody here permanently, or some continuous identity right here. But there isn't one. It's built over time, as we can kind of easily observe inside our brain. And actually at a quantum scale, or if you zoom in on life close enough, you'll see that there's actually nothing here in a separate sense. There's not me and then the chair. There's just basically a cloud of subatomic particles that are entering and exiting existence at a speed that we're not even able to really notice from the particular way that our brains are set up. But in fact, something like 99.999% of the universe is empty space. It's basically just a energy potential in continual motion, but for some conventional reasons, we learn to build, or we have come to build a person out of this, and we attach to that over and over and over again until it just sticks, basically. And then that's me, and that's you, and there's the separation of 1,000 different things. When in reality there is no separation, there's just one thing happening. But obviously that tool of measurement and separation and here and there, me and them, serves a purpose in terms of just living our everyday life. But it needs to be understood that is just out of a conventional sense. It's used that way. Ultimately, we are all one, both scientifically and through meditation. We can recognize this firsthand. And so, as I've talked about before, that is basically just a slowing down of the machine, whereas we're so accustomed to continuously latching on to every thought, sensation, memory, whatever that comes before our screen of awareness. We slow down that process, or we don't slow it down, but we we stop engaging with it. And as I kind of refer to as the muscle analogy, the muscle of the self or ego, the default mode network, starts to slow down as we stop grabbing on to each thought, each little mini me that comes by. And over time that we start to have spaces in between in our experience. There's a thought comes, we don't latch onto it, then it goes, another one comes, and we just notice these instead of jumping down the usual neural pathway that we've come so accustomed to doing. And by not feeding this machine, gradually it begins to dissipate on its own, and you see larger and larger spaces in your experience. There's gaps where you're not there at all. Life just seems to be unfolding. There's not some kind of that tireless machine inside isn't running to the same degree that it usually is. And so that continuous separate entity that we're so certain of and that seems so apparent to us gradually dissolves. And by definition, as your sense of separation is reduced, then your sense of oneness comes into focus, for lack of a better phrase at the moment. But basically, if there isn't two, then there has to be one. So meditation is that process of gradually slowing down the machine. The analogy of the movie screen is pretty good. You go to a theater and watch a movie, you would think there's one continuous movie being played onto the screen. There doesn't seem to be any gap or space there, but if you actually look at the movie reel, it's just a series of images floating around or spinning around, or however that thing works. It's a series of images placed onto a screen at a certain frame rate. And if you do that fast enough, then our eyes are not able to catch the space between each frame. But it is there, just because it's at a certain speed doesn't mean it's a continuous entity. But if you slow down the movie reel of your own experience, you can begin to see these gaps. And what you thought was you is actually just a series of thoughts and sensations and emotions that you habitually grab onto and you pull into them, and you do that so fast and so automatically for most adults that you don't really even notice you're doing it. It's just second nature. And that creates virtually every challenge or every problem that the human species is facing right now, one way or another, pretty much dials down to that sense of me. So that's basically the challenge of meditation is, are you willing to sit there and let this movie slow down a bit and take a closer look to see, are you actually there? Is there a Jeff there continuously? Or is there just an awareness, a universal awareness with a variety of different movies playing all at once?